Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, welcome to Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you have construction needs? Maybe you need to get a pergola, something done to your house? Check out K&H Construction. My boy Chris Helms from Waxahachie will take care of you. Let him know DV LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is someone running for Texas 6th Congressional District, which covers all of Ellis County, Mr. Brian Stahl. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. You know what I tell every candidate that's running, and I've done this every cycle I've ever covered. Thank you for wanting to serve your community in elected office. It's not easy on the family. It's not easy on anybody. And the fact that you want to put yourself out there to the gauntlet that is the politics, especially national politics. Thank you for wanting to serve and continue to serve, because you are a police officer, and we're going to get into that. But what made you want to run?
You know, honestly, I've had a lifelong desire to serve, and me being a police officer for 21 years, I've got to serve the community in that world and that realm, and I saw the impact that it had. And I actually got involved in politics about a year and a half ago, becoming a city council member, and I'm currently the mayor right now. So once I dove into that world of service, I realized how much I fell in love with it, and it's service on a totally different level. You really have to be connected with people, and obviously you get to enjoy the benefits of building a community in a different way. And everybody that you run into really enjoys what you're doing and appreciates what you're doing. And I really fell in love with it. And I started to look around to see what we currently had as representation. And I just felt like we deserved more, and we deserved better, honestly, than what we were currently getting.
Well, I mean, that's definitely why people run. They want to see a change. And I mean, but this is a big office. This is U.S. Congress compared to, usually when you see a mayor, councilman, they try maybe county judge and some other things, and you're taking a big swing, Mr. Stahl.
I am. It's go big or go home, right? It's one of those things where I really truly believe that I understand what it means to serve the community, and one of my biggest things is constituent services. And being available for the community. You have to be with the community and amongst the community, and you have to be able to go out there and answer the tough questions, and you have to do it in person. You can't just do live town halls every month or two, and you have to be able to really have your finger on the pulse of what's going on and what's needed. And you have to be able to serve all constituents and not just a small select few. We have such a beautiful district. It's really unique because the southern portion is obviously more rural. So the needs of those constituents are tremendously different than the ones up in the Metroplex area and the more urban areas, in Tarrant County and Dallas County. But you have to be able to be involved in all of it and put yourself out there and, solicit feedback. And you want to know what the people expect from you in Washington. You don't just get elected and then, kind of do what you want to do.
Yeah, this district is very weird, like all these congressional districts. It goes out into the middle, like Glen Rose, and then, out to Ellis County, and then in the middle of like some Fort Worth and Arlington. Yep. And there's just all kinds of things going on in that district. But tell me more about you, my friend.
Yeah, so I've been married for almost 18 years now. We have 3 kids. My oldest is technically a sophomore now at the University of Alabama. He graduated a year early. He's studying political science. He actually just got hired on at a campaign out there, a U.S. Senate campaign. So he's very excited about that. My other son is, he's big into sports and big into outdoors and hunting and fishing. And then we have a little 7-year-old daughter, and she is everything that we always wanted in a daughter. She's amazing, and she's playing basketball now and does cheerleading and does all the fun things that she enjoys to do.
There is always a complaint about the intrusiveness of government and how much government has expanded in my lifetime, certainly yours. So I want to know in principle, because principles are important. They'll govern how you do things. In principle, what is the proper role of government in the lives of the people, especially the federal government?
I think we need to have a significantly less role. It needs to be a limited government. I believe we need to return a lot of the powers back to the people and back to the states. Especially when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to education. A couple of things that I'm hearing when I'm talking to people is, they're really tired of feeling like, the government is constantly overreaching, and they're not being, fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. They're forcing implementation of different studies in schools. And I think that's a big deal. And I think people really want less big government involvement in their day-to-day life. And I think they expect a couple of things from the government. They expect national defense, obviously, and security, whether it's securing the border or bolstering our military. And, they also expect to, the government to take care of the country in general, but be responsible about it and not be so, authoritative and dictator like with certain policies that have been put in place, especially during the last administration.
What values drive you?
Man. So faith, obviously, faith, family, and freedom. I do everything because of the glory of God. I put all my glory, I give all the glory to God. And, He's really guided me through my life and been there in the really tough times, and I've prayed about this a lot. My wife and I have. And, if it's in God's will, it's going to happen, and then family, obviously. I want to build something better for future generations. And that includes my kids, and all kids and the number of generations that are coming after us is who knows, but we need to start making it better for them, and then freedoms. You got to protect your freedoms. You have to be able to fight for, the God-given freedoms that we have. You have to protect the Constitution. I'm a very, very strong pro Second Amendment guy. I'm anti-red flag laws. And so it's really those things, faith, family, and freedom. That's what drives me.
It's you had mentioned, the debt earlier, and it's upwards of 30 some odd trillion dollars. I should know the number, and unfortunately it escapes me because it just keeps going up so fast. And then every year appropriations, the way that they're supposed to happen, are not happening, and you're getting these government shutdowns, which has personally affected me. And you have all these things that are happening, and it seems like it's broken. So tell me, how will you approach the budget when you're voting, and what are your thoughts on the debt, and what should the government be doing less of?
Well, obviously we need to cut all the waste, fraud, and abuse. I think DOJ did a really good job of exposing a lot of things. A few nights ago, there was actually a bill that was put on the floor by Eli Crane to eliminate, the NED Act or NED bill. And it's a National Endowment Diplomacy Bill, which sends $300+ million overseas to foreign governments. Why are we doing that? Why do we have, bills in place that just, sends $300+ million of our hardworking money overseas to a foreign government? And it doesn't even specify what government, and unfortunately, our current congressman actually voted to keep that in place. He voted to keep that bill, that bill in place. The Republicans wanted to basically, terminate it and get rid of it so it couldn't be used again. And he decided to vote with the Democrats and keep that bill on the books and keep it in place so we can continue to send hardworking money overseas. There's several things like that. When you have bills that are cloaked in language or verbiage that is appealing to the mass population of the people, and when you actually dive into these bills and you realize that there's a very small percentage that goes towards actually supporting what they are claiming the bill is going to support, and a lot of it there's a lot of pork in these bills. There's a lot of additives, and a lot of money in the tunes of billions and billions of dollars are going overseas to fund foreign governments, foreign wars, and foreign experimental projects. And all that stuff needs to stop. We need to stop doing that.
Yeah, the bills always sound real pretty in their names, like the Affordable Care Act or the Inflation Reduction Act. And they always have a great title, but those things get dropped. You'll get a 3,000-page bill dropped the night before, and you got to vote. And a lot of things that happen when it comes to those things you're talking about is they'll drop it in the middle of the night, and you got to go with your party. Is that a situation where you would say no?
Yeah, I'm telling you right now, and I've told everybody this, I'm not an automatic yes on every spending bill. I'm absolutely not an automatic yes. And I gave this example on another show that I did. If there's a spending bill and, for easy numbers, it's $10 billion, and you start digging into it and you realize, well, Texas and more specifically District 6 is only going to, benefit from $30 million of that. And the rest of it, the vast majority of it's either going to go overseas or it's going to go to fund, experimental projects for different organizations or NGOs or governments. And my vote is no. And I feel totally comfortable coming back home to Texas and telling my constituents I voted no to bring $35 million to Texas, because in turn, it was going to send $8 billion of your taxpayer money overseas. And I think that, when I give that example and I talk to people on campaign trail, they thank me for that. And they say, we wouldn't want that money because we don't want $9 billion going overseas when we're only getting pennies on the dollar. It's stuff like that. And, having somebody that is more of an establishment voter who goes with whatever he's told to go with and not ever voting down a spending bill, I think is one of the biggest problems we have in Washington. And that's why we have such a big national debt. And that's why we, our interest rate is on the debt is astronomical.
We're going to get close to the defense budget just on the debt, the interest on the debt. I'm sorry to cut you off on that.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's because of bills that get these rubber stamp automatic yeses, and they go to fund things that have nothing to do with making America better or making Texas better or making District 6 better. And if it doesn't have those things in there, then I'm sorry, I'm a no.
Right. Now, one of the things that you've been discussing during these talks about money, and there's no denying that we send money everywhere for everything that you can imagine. And every year, Rand Paul points that out, and regardless of, what people may think, Rand Paul, whatever, every year he does this. And he points out the ludicrous amount of money that goes to all these different things and funds these things that, just make no sense in other countries. So you had mentioned that. We have been very involved as of late when it comes to, things going on internationally. I want to know in principle what your thoughts on international relations are, and then we'll kind of hit the specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of nailed it right there. We send so much money to so many countries that don't align with, they're not an ally of us. We send money to Syria and Jordan and Iran. And, why are we paying these countries to hate us? They hate us for free. Why are we sending money over there for these different things? But I also understand that we do have allies, and we do need to make sure that we're able to, if we're able to, and help them in certain situations or incidents that they may be involved in that could threaten their security, which in turn would threaten our security. So I understand that you have to have, a political presence worldwide. However, sending money to all these other countries and all these NGOs and foreign experimental projects is not something that I support. If it has to do with, keeping America safe, keeping our allies safe, and keeping, trying to promote peace, then I'm all for it. But the fluff, that needs to be cut out. It needs to go.
Because we are on foreign topics, I definitely want to discuss one of the major things that we're doing, and that's funding Ukraine and its war with Russia. And, there's criticisms about that. The Republican Party is definitely not completely unified on that one. I want to know your thoughts on Ukraine, and we'll kind of move through the gauntlet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's one of those things where we need to stop funding a foreign war. I think I don't even know the exact number because it continues to grow, daily, the hundreds of billions of dollars that we've sent over there.
I don't think they know, Brian. I don't think anybody really knows.
I don't think so. But, but to my point, what's the return on our investment on that? What is our end game? Why do we continue to send all of this money over there with no real strategy on how to make this stop? And I know President Trump has been really trying to, bring both sides together. And there's obviously, disagreements and there's negotiations fall through. And I totally understand that. But I think if we were to get tighter with our purse strings, it would bring some more people to the table instead of us just continuing to send money over there. Because if we do that, then it's just, it's the same as it was 6 months ago or a year ago. And they can talk about, wanting to end the war and peace talks, negotiations. But if nothing changes for them, then why would they change anything themselves? So I think we need to, pull back a little bit and cut a lot of the support that we're sending over there monetarily, and especially no boots on the ground for sure, but monetarily, and we'll see if that changes some people's minds.
Historically, we've been a big ally of Israel, but how we do that has been criticized within the Republican Party, and how much we do that. So I want your thoughts on Israel. I mean, we just finished helping them with, and those rockets and stuff that we supplied, that stuff is not cheap. Bringing ships over there, that I understand. That's not cheap. There was criticisms about how they executed the war. There's all kinds of things when it comes to Israel, even within our party, not just, what Democrats do. But I want you to talk to me about your thoughts on Israel and how our alliance with.
Well, obviously they are an ally of us, and they're somebody that we have a vested interest in, protecting, because they have been a very strong ally to us with wars that we have been in, and with foreign policy and stuff. So I believe that we need to continue to support them, but we also need to understand, what goes on over there in Israel and the war that they're fighting. A lot of people they can't grasp it because of, I'll be honest with you, the media, and the media pushes an agenda, whether it doesn't matter what media you're watching, they push an agenda for one side or the other. And you see a lot of anti-Israel protests, you see a lot of pro-Israel protests, but at the end of the day, we need to continue to make sure that they are safe because they are one of our allies. Now, does that mean using the full force of our military? I don't think so. Does that mean, assisting them with, missiles or the Iron Dome or anything like that? Then probably so. Yes, I think we need to continue to make sure that they are a strong ally to us. But the extent at which we do that, I think we're doing a fairly decent job. Do I think we need to do significantly more? I don't. Do I think we need to spend significantly more money? I don't. I think we need to just continue to make sure that they are, able to protect themselves and they can figure out the issues that they're having. And we don't need to be the world's big brother or the world's police. We don't. But we need to assist people in countries when we can and when they align with us. And I think that we're doing a pretty good job of that.
10 years in the Navy, and getting deployed, obviously went to Iraq and went through that and everything that comes with that. And a lot of brothers and sisters in arms that went through that. So in Congress, you will be the one authorizing force if there is war. I want to know, what are your thoughts on Americans going to all these different countries, and where do you stand on?
So I'll tell you this right now. It would have to be something of, great significance for me to even consider, voting yes on putting boots on the ground. I think with the technology we have now and the way that we're able to, precision strike certain targets and really affect countries and economies overseas is something that we need to continue to do. A full-fledged war, it would take something of, huge significance for me to even consider that. An attack on America, an attack on American soil, a mass attack on a military base that we have overseas. Now you're talking about something a little bit different, but, trying to send troops into Venezuela or trying to send troops into Iran right now, I'm not for that. I'm absolutely against that. I think that we can be able to handle it without, the full fledged of a war declaration in the full force of the military.
For September 11th, and that goes into what you mentioned with Venezuela and Iran. After September 11th, they passed the AUMF. And with that AUMF, they've justified doing a lot of different things, some that I've been part of. And it just continues and continues and continues. So I want to know your thoughts on AUMF, and if the authorizing military force, folks. With that act, there's been a lot of things that have been justified under that act. And it's kind of, the way that it works is usually Congress authorize after an initial action, et cetera. When it comes to war, Congress has to be the one to authorize that. And, there's been a lot of things done with AUMF. And one of them is when you designate Venezuela as a state sponsor of terrorism or terrorist or network organization, then you could go in and do that. And Iran, same thing. Or even, now there's talks about other places, and, it's one of those things that's been stretched a little bit. So I want to know what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think sometimes it's been stretched, but obviously the president does have the power to protect the country, and he does have the authorization to, strike those boats that are known to be carrying terrorists and large amounts of cocaine or fentanyl to our coast. He absolutely has a right to do that. He also had the right to go serve a warrant in Venezuela. That's what it was. It was an arrest warrant is what they did. They went and served an arrest warrant in a foreign country. Now,
Yes.
Did they use the military? Absolutely they did. Is that a declaration of war, or is that teetering on the line? I don't think so. I think depending on how things shake out with Iran, I think if we continue with precision strikes against Iran like we did to their nuclear sites, and we don't put boots on the ground to assist there, then I think that falls within that. I think that's totally fine and justifiable. However, it does get stretched a little bit, especially when you start maneuvering warships and you start planning on putting, our troops in positions to where they could, if they had to, go into these countries. I think that's getting to the point where you need to start talking to Congress about a couple of things, and you need to get authorization. You can't just, go ahead and do that on your own and then see how it shakes out. I don't think that that's right. And obviously, I'm not saying that's what's happening, but if something of that nature were to happen, I think it's something that would be overstepping that boundary. And that.
In general, do you think that, and this, applies to every president from here to kingdom come, do you think that the executive branch has too much power? Do you think that Congress has ceded some of their power to different things?
I think originally it wasn't intended for that, but to answer your question bluntly, yes. I think that, Congress has given up some of their power, and they've done so, with what you were just talking about, and giving the executive branch the authorization to do certain things without Congress's approval. I think we need to return that power back to Congress the way it was intended, and I don't necessarily think or see, in the future, a president declaring full-fledged war and sending the full force of the United States military into a country without Congress's approval. However, like I said before, there's certain things that a lot of people start to look at and pay attention to, and they are talking about it being like, that's getting close. Like, airstrikes is one thing, but a lot of people felt like the president overstepped his bounds by sending military troops and law enforcement officials into Venezuela to serve an arrest warrant. I don't agree with them. But if we were to send, the full force of the military into Iran right now to help what's going on there, then that is something that Congress would absolutely have to approve. And I don't think the president would do that without Congress's approval.
Let's get to things closer to home, but still kind of international. Obviously, we've had an influx of over 13 million people just walk over the border in the last administration. You have fentanyl that's still very much an issue and killing thousands of people in the U.S., hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. And then you have talk about targeting the cartels as terrorist organizations. Is that something you support? And what are your thoughts on illegal immigration and this fentanyl crisis?
Well, so first and foremost, I absolutely support labeling, narcotics organizations or cartels as terrorists. I did 4.5 years deep undercover narcotics earlier on in my career, several years ago. So I was able to experience that world a little bit different than other people have been able to see. And I fully agree with what President Trump's doing in international waters when he's striking the Venezuelan boats that are bringing large amounts of fentanyl or cocaine or heroin or whatever the case may be to our country, because they're very precise and they are very, methodical with the planning, and they know where those boats originated from. They know who's on those boats, and they know what those boats are carrying. They're not just randomly picking one out of 1,000 boats out there and deciding to drop a missile on them. So I fully support that. Now, the immigration thing, I agree with you. We have such a big problem in this country when it comes to illegal immigration. And a lot of it is because of the past administration and their, weak stance on it. I think so securing the southern border and northern border, all of our borders, is something that we need to take very serious, and we need to continue to pursue. And having a secure border means having a more secure nation, and going after violent illegal criminals that are known murderers, known rapists, known child predators, known drug dealers, and known human traffickers is first and foremost what we need to do. We need to go after the people that we can, and I think that they are right now. I really think that they are focusing on those kind of people, and unfortunately, there's other people that get wrapped up. Now, how do we fix it? So I think we need to streamline the ability for illegal immigrants who are here being productive members of society and who have been here for years, being productive members of society, who have gotten zero trouble, haven't had any issues with the law after coming here. I get it. They came here illegally, so they did break the law. But once they're here, they are really trying to make a better life for themselves and their family. And they just want to be productive. They want to be, intertwined into our communities, and they believe in our values and they support our values. And, I think that we should streamline that. And we need to talk about, the asylum. How many people came over, quote unquote, seeking asylum? And that was an easy button for the past administration to say, we need to let them all in. Well, there's very specific things that people have to be fleeing in order to be eligible for asylum within our country. And none of those checks and balances were ever made. And they just allowed them to flow in, undocumented, under the ruse of everybody's claiming asylum. And so we need to really look at that as well.
Yeah, the immigration system has been fought and for administrations going back to Reagan, and I was around. I'm an old guy. I was around. So, it's been something that's constant. And it's every election cycle, somebody is saying something about immigration and nobody seems to fix it. Is that something that you will pursue, actually addressing our entire immigration system and seeing how we could do better?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think, we really need to look at the process in which people who are coming over here trying to establish citizenship. It's a very long, very expensive process for people, and again, if you have people that have been involved in this community or in this country and they are productive members of this country, they pay taxes, they haven't, had any run-ins with law enforcement, their kids go to school here, their kids are involved in sports, and, some of their kids are even in college now. There has to be a way for us to figure out how we can streamline that process for them and basically unclog the system. The biggest problem is the system is so overwhelmed right now. And it's because we have these things in place where it takes, several years, if not a decade, to get citizenship. And, why is it taking so long if we know that these people are actually doing what they said they were going to do? They actually support the United States. They pledge allegiance to the United States. They want to be here. Why are we clogging up the system with people like that? And I think it would free up a lot if we were able to streamline that and look at, how we can make them become U.S. citizens faster. Therefore, we wouldn't have this big backlog that we're dealing with right now.
Asked another candidate who's running for Texas 6 this question. I think it's pertinent. Is immigration a privilege or a right?
So it's absolutely a privilege to come here. It's not a right to come here. I think it's a privilege to come to the United States. And again, the people who are really coming to the United States, who really want to make themselves or give themselves a better chance at a better life and really pursue the American dream, I think they agree with you. It's a definite privilege for them to be here. And they understand that, and the ones I'm talking about really, they do believe it's a privilege and they don't want to lose that privilege. They don't feel like it's their God-given right to be here. They came here because they wanted something better. They want to do it the right way. They want to take advantage of the privilege that they have been given. And I think that we should help them do that.
Definitely. Now, I wanted to kind of move into the finances kind of thing because, and I know we talked about National Day, we talked that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about everyday Americans and their different costs that are getting them. And one of them is insurance. And that's been a big discussion about whether you do subsidies, don't do subsidies, give the people the money directly instead of the insurance company. ACA was supposed to make things cheaper, $500, according to, President Barack Obama. It's not quite working out that way. It is a major issue affecting this country. So how will you go about trying to address that issue?
So I think the biggest thing is the subsidies. Again, if we feel the need that we have to subsidize something, there's an obvious problem somewhere, somehow there's a breakdown, right? I think we need to return a lot of the powers when it comes to insurance back to the states and back to the people. I think we need to make it more competitive. I think we need to be able to shop, insurance policies across state lines. I think that the government shouldn't dictate who or what gets what in relation to the insurance provider that they have. And I think that we need to be significantly more transparent with the cost of insurance. We need to be more transparent with the cost of prescription drugs. We need to be more transparent with, the cost of procedures and hospital visits. And we need to start digging into, okay, who's actually getting all of this money? Because you go to the hospital and you spend, 2.5 hours there and you get a bill for $7,700. And you kind of look back like, well, why did it cost me $7,700 to go to the hospital for 2 hours? And there's no real answer because there's no transparency. There's no checks and balances. There's significant kickbacks within the medical field, whether it is with doctors or insurance companies, or big pharma is a big one, obviously. But if you open the books and then you make it more competitive and you allow people to choose what's best for them and their family, and I think that, a lot of that would be cut out, and we'd be able to help a significant larger amount of people find health insurance that is what they need for their family, and it's not what's forced upon them.
What is your views on energy policy? What would you support if you're elected?
So I'll tell you this right now. I think that, just speaking in Texas, I'll start in Texas, our energy grid needs to be completely revamped. I know that you probably remember the storms of 2020 and 2022, the big ice storms. And, how many people in my district, District 6, went without electricity for a month or 6 weeks because the grid wasn't able to sustain what was going on, So we need to fix the grid, and we need to start looking at nuclear. I really, truly believe that nuclear is the way to go. And especially when you have these AI data centers that are starting to come in, if we allow these to happen and we allow them to tie into the Texas energy grid, it is going to destroy us. It's going to cripple us. We're one ice storm away from it going down as it is. We don't need to have all the extra stress on the grid. Now, I will say, out in Haskell, Texas, I know I have a buddy out there, and they're building a large Google data center out there. And when I say large, it's, a couple thousand acres.
Yes.
And before they're doing it, before they're even breaking ground on the data center, the first thing they're doing is breaking ground on a nuclear plant. The nuclear plant.
They're doing one of the small nuclear plants.
Yep. They're doing it, and they're going to tie in the data center to that. So the data center is not going to be taxing the Texas energy grid, which I think is a great idea. AI is the future. All these computer companies and artificial intelligence, that Pandora's box has already been opened. That's not going anywhere. It's definitely going to be the future. Now, how do we sustain it? We're not able to with what we currently have. But if we do things like what they're doing out in West Texas, I think it's significantly easier. I think the wind turbines, the clean energy thing, I am completely against that. I know one of the engineers who helps design those and build those, and the amount of, fossil fuels that go into putting one of those up or making one of those does not get offset by the amount of energy that windmill brings. And one windmill doesn't even provide enough energy to power one house for a year in Texas. That's why you see thousands of them, and then not only that, but what is it doing to the environment? What's it doing? Now you're hearing about birds that are getting killed and how it's affecting, different plant life and different species around where all these big windmill farms are being put up. And so it's not just that easy. Like, let's put windmills up and we'll be fine. Solar is something else that we need to look at. Obviously, I talked to somebody out in Nevada not too long ago. They have large solar farms out there. So I kind of picked his brain. And the first thing he said to me, which was very interesting, he said, "We don't have the weather you have in Texas." So I asked him what he meant. And he said, well, out here where we are, there's not chunks of ice the size of baseballs that fall from the sky several times a year. And if we did, it would destroy all of these solar panels and they would be useless. So solar farms are something that, we need to look at for storing energy and getting energy. However, we need to seriously consider the natural environment and that we live in and some of the things that we have to deal with on a yearly basis when it comes to weather, and how could that affect that, or could it end up costing us significant amount of money to fix it or to maintain it?
Yeah, no, even with those data centers, one of the things that I forgot to mention is that they hide their consumption of water or electricity as a trade secret. They list it under trade secrets. So most of the time you can't pull up what they're taking. I don't even know how that's legal, but they file it under their trade secrets. So those are things that, have or can be addressed by Congress. I won't take a position, but they can. And I mean, there's things like that, you know, and one of the biggest sentiments, and Congress is about as popular as a root canal. It really is. And you know that. You've heard it. And you've been talking to constituents, I'm sure. And they tell you, you know, they're not doing that. There's always an opinion on Congress. One of the big opinions too, they say, is that things are bought and paid for. And, you know, you get congressmen that come in and, you know, they're 100,000aires and they leave multi-millionaires. And some of the things that have been discussed is their ability to trade stocks when they can influence policy. If you are elected into Congress, what is your stance on that? What will you do?
So, you know, I didn't get into serving the public to become rich. You know, I know exactly 0 multimillionaire police officers, and I've been doing it for 21 years. So money is not what's,
bro. Yeah,
money is not what's driving me. You know, all the money that we have raised for my campaign has all been small dollar donations. I don't have, you know, large entities or corporations. I'm not indebted to anybody or any organization or any service or any group or I'm not indebted to anybody, you know, and I'm very proud of that. You know, it's something that I've worked really hard for and connected with a lot of people and have been on the phone, you know, 15 to 20 hours a week trying to connect with people and just talk with them and, you know, convince them that, you know, I'm the best choice for District 6 right now. And we've had a lot of support and a lot of belief. But when it comes to the insider trading, Congress has the ability to be privy to classified information, and whether it comes for, you know, contracts or it comes for businesses themselves. So I am totally against Congress's ability to, you know, trade these stocks, and especially at the rate that they're doing it, when they have information or they have access to information that the general public does not have. You know, I think that is, you know, kind of the, you know, do as I say, not as I do, or what's best for me is not best for thee. And I am completely against that. And that is, you know, absolutely not how I think we need to be serving our constituents in our state and our country. So I am definitely against that for sure. And I think we need to do something about that. And we need to make sure that they're no longer able to have the ability to trade while they're in Congress.
Brian, I could have you on here forever, but unfortunately I'm kind of running out of time. I do want to kind of hit you on a little bit of a lightning round. Okay. If you're elected Congress, you know, veterans issues, where will you stand?
So obviously we need to take care of our veterans. They are the backbone of this country. If it wasn't for them, then I wouldn't be sitting here right now, and neither would you. And you know that. You served, and thank you very much for your service.
Appreciate
it. I think we need to, you know, look at mental health. I was actually a national founding board member for SBS, which is Survivors of Blue Suicide. I'm very proud of that. And it's something that is, you know, very near and dear to my heart. And I know Kill 22 is something that is, you know, we deal with every single day, and it's extremely unfortunate and sad, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that, you know, instead of allocating billions of dollars to make illegal immigrants more comfortable in this country, why don't we start allocating money to supporting the veterans, whether it's housing, mental health, and making sure that they have the care that they need. And that's something that is, you know, extremely important to me. And I think that we've been, you know, kind of forgetting them here in the recent past because of, you know, some of the situations that the last administration put us in with having to deal with the 13 million plus people that are in this country illegally.
Do you support community care?
I do support community care. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's something that really, like, for instance, you know, I'm getting dental work done somewhere else. The wait for the VA for dental work was about a year. So they were able to get me into a local dentist. And that's something that was kind of curtailed in the last administration. The other lightning round question is education. You know, some people feel that the government's too involved. Some people feel that maybe the government could do more for special education kids. If you're elected to Congress, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, so first and foremost, I think that the Department of Education either needs to be completely revamped or just, you know, done away with. And I think we need to return the power back to the states and back to the people and allow the parents to make the decision for what's best for their children. You know, a lot of these entities, whether it's special education or charter schools or private schools or even, you know, public schools, get a significant amount of funding from the government, but there's always strings attached. You know, I think that the government needs to make sure that we have a solid foundation when it comes to the education of future generations. And I think that the government needs to support that. However, I think it needs to be left up to the states and especially the voters and the parents to decide what's best for their kids. I don't think the government should say, here's $100 million. However, you have to teach, this curriculum, or you have to hit A, B, C, D. Well, those are strings attached. And what school district or what private school or charter school has the ability to say, nah, keep your money? I mean, of course they want the money. And so, it's kind of a, here's money, but you're going to do this for me. And a lot of parents are starting to realize that. And that's why I see a lot of parents, especially where I'm at in the southern part of the district, they're pulling their kids from school and they're homeschooling now. Homeschooling is going through the roof. Through the roof. And they're also relying on their churches. And I think that's great. That you got to think back, 2 or 3 generations ago, we didn't have the schooling that we have. It was up to the community. It was up to the parents. It was up to the churches, and they had a small, farmhouse or a schoolhouse for kids. And they would teach them things that were pertinent to survival and pertinent to, building an education that was going to suit them as they grow up. And we're so far removed from that. And I think a lot of parents are really starting to understand that. And they say, I can do it better at home because I don't want them to be taught this or that, or be exposed to sexually explicit material in kindergarten. I don't want that for my child. I want to teach them, the core values and prepare them to be productive members of society more so than what I think schools are currently doing.
Yeah, total issue. And as a father of special needs, there are very great educators that are doing great things in the state of Texas for special needs kids. Not knocking. But when you have a system that's meant for it, the student has to fit in a certain box because it's a big system and it's serving so many kids. When you have that situation, there's going to be a lot of kids, especially now, that are let out, especially special needs kids. And so, what the government does with that is very important, especially when it, these special needs parents that are struggling with autism and ADHD and all the other things, and their kid doesn't quite fit in that system that's there. And it's either take it or leave it. And that is a very detrimental thing for a kid. Sorry, that's a little bit of a soapbox, but I appreciate that. When it comes to veterans issues of the blue, and special needs, I'm very clear how I stand on. So, I really do appreciate you coming on my show. I always give the candidate the last word. So I want you to go ahead and talk to the people of Texas 6 and, just talk to them straight up.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you very much for having me on here. It's an honor and a pleasure, obviously,
thank you,
to get the information out there. And I really appreciate the format of the show. Lastly, I want to say this, I do really believe in constituent services, and we have so many constituents right now that feel so disconnected from the current representation that we're getting right now. And, when you have to call an office 15 or 20 times and never get a call back, that's a big issue. And people are really starting to take notice of that. And it's really starting to upset a lot of people because they feel forgotten. They feel like their voice doesn't matter. And that's not how I was raised to serve people. I was raised to serve people by going out there and being amongst the community and answering the call when they call. And, and the last thing I'll say is you repeat what you don't repair. You repeat what you don't repair. There's a lot of people that don't want the same old repetitive way of lack of representation that we're currently getting, and they're ready to repair that. And I've asked that you repair it by voting for me, Brian Stahl, on March 3rd. And I will represent you in District 6 in Washington, D.C., and I'll make sure that your voice is heard.
Thank you so much for coming on the show again. Can you stick around real quick after the show?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, bro.